And over the last 41 years, he has treated you like a second-class citizen. 41 years ago, you were falsely accused of fathering a little girl, and that accusation has ruined your life. The defendant is not your daughter. Is that correct? Ms. Jackson, you say Mr. Jackson is the only father you've ever known. You have no doubt Mr. Jackson is your father, and you intend to prove it today.
Ruined me financially wise, health-wise, mental-wise. I can't get driver's license. I can't get passport. I used to couldn't keep a job. It ruined my heart, Your Honor, to where I have a pacemaker in me now.
When the truth takes 40 years to arrive, it doesn't knock. It breaks down the door. In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, one DNA test shattered decades of pain, resentment, and regret, proving once again that truth changes everything. In the intricate dance between law and justice, few stages expose human emotion like the paternity court. Here, evidence meets emotion, and science meets the soul. Judge Lauren Lake doesn't just preside over legal battles. She navigates the moral storms where love, betrayal, and identity collide. The DNA test, once a simple scientific procedure, has become a modern confession booth, revealing not only who fathered whom, but also how truth can both heal and destroy. The story of Mr. Jackson and Miss Jackson is not just a courtroom episode, it's a 40-year chronicle of misunderstanding, lost time, and a haunting question. What if the truth comes too late? The people who regret taking DNA tests often do so because they unearth realities that dismantle everything they believed about family, loyalty, and forgiveness. But in Judge Lauren Lake's court, every revelation serves a greater principle. Justice must confront truth, even when it hurts. For Mr. Jackson, that confrontation began decades ago, with an accusation that followed him like a shadow. What started as a rumor spiraled into lost jobs, ruined health, and an unpaid child support debt that bled him dry. Yet beneath his bitterness was a lingering question. Was he truly the father? This case, now echoed across podcasts like the Game-Changing Attorney podcast and the Divorce Course podcast, isn't just about law. It's about the relationship between law and justice, between evidence and empathy, and between those who stand on opposite sides of the courtroom, yet share the same blood. Judge Lauren Lake stands at the center of that tension, bridging the gap between cold legal frameworks and the warm pulse of humanity. In her courtroom, the concept of justice in jurisprudence isn't abstract. It breathes, it cries, it forgives. The evidence stage in divorce cases, the adverse inference in the Evidence Act, and the endless dance of legal interpretation all fade when the raw human truth unfolds, because behind every "you are the father" or "you are not the father," there's a universe of broken promises, lost time, and the desperate need for closure. This case's emotional gravity connects to more than just a test result. It speaks to the heart of Celebrate Recovery testimonies, to the countless stories of parents and children seeking reconciliation after years of silence. It's about what happens when adoption stories, cheating stories, and the pursuit of legal clarity merge into one devastating truth. Judge Lauren Lake often says that the courtroom isn't just about verdicts. It's about restoration. The DNA test that finally proved Mr. Jackson's paternity didn't only change a legal record, it redefined two lives bound by misunderstanding. For Miss Jackson, it was a vindication, a lifelong wound finally closed by science. For her father, it was both liberation and punishment, the truth he demanded but could barely bear to hear. The courtroom erupted not in anger, but in tears. The DNA evidence had the final word. The truth changes everything, even when it comes too late. In the broader lens of jurisprudence, this story embodies the eternal struggle between truth and belief. For decades, Mr. Jackson lived under the weight of an accusation he doubted yet could not escape. His heart, literally damaged by the years of stress, bore testimony to the devastating human cost of legal delay. He became living evidence of what happens when justice stalls, when society confuses accusation with fact and suspicion with guilt. Every podcast that revisits this case, whether it's the Game Changing Attorney podcast dissecting the procedural flaws, or the Divorce Course podcast exploring emotional testimony, returns to the same haunting point. Truth has a pulse, and sometimes it beats too late for those it belongs to. In her years on the bench, Judge Lauren Lake has seen the courtroom become both a battleground and a sanctuary. Her authority is not merely legal, it's moral. She represents that delicate intersection where the concept of justice in jurisprudence becomes more than law. It becomes life. And when people walk into her courtroom, they don't just seek rulings, they seek redemption. The DNA test, the silent witness of modern truth, doesn't lie. Yet, its results often unveil lies we've lived comfortably within for years. In this case, the revelation was transformative. Miss Jackson, once treated as an outsider in her own family, finally stood validated. Not just as a daughter, but as truth incarnate. Her forgiveness toward her father became a reflection of celebrate recovery testimonies heard in church halls, therapy rooms, and recovery centers. Proof that healing begins where bitterness ends. And then there's the law, the unwavering framework that holds it all together. In this courtroom, adverse inference in evidence isn't just a procedural term. It becomes a reflection of human instinct, the way we infer guilt or innocence from silence, avoidance, or doubt. Mr. Jackson's silence for decades became its own kind of evidence, a shield and a wound, both born from fear. As the test results were read, Lauren Lake's steady voice carried both authority and compassion. She knew that no verdict could return the lost years, but the acknowledgement of truth could set both hearts free. That's the paradox of justice. It can't undo pain, but it can reframe it. Outside the courtroom, this story continues to echo in adoption stories and cheating stories told in countless homes. It mirrors the anguish of families torn apart by mistrust and the slow, painful process of forgiveness. It raises hard questions about how society defines family, responsibility, and truth. For many, the DNA test represents betrayal, the exposure of secrets that once held fragile peace together. For others, it's salvation, a scientific bridge across decades of distance. But in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, it's something greater, the ultimate equalizer between emotion and fact. The courtroom becomes a stage not for vengeance, but for revelation. The evidence stage transforms into a theater of honesty, where every document, every testimony, every tear becomes part of a larger narrative, the relationship between law and justice itself. This particular episode, now shared widely in full episodes online, continues to serve as a reminder that truth, while delayed, never disappears. The Supreme Court may set the precedents, but it's judges like Lauren Lake who keep justice human, where evidence meets empathy and law meets life. In the landscape of legal storytelling, this case has transcended the boundaries of television. It has become a podcast conversation, a case study, and a moral parable about time, regret, and redemption. It stands beside the stories discussed in the Game Changing Attorney podcast and the Divorce Course podcast. Stories that reveal the price of truth and the courage it demands. In the end, justice isn't about winning, it's about knowing. Knowing the truth, however painful, is the only path toward peace. And in Judge Lauren Lake's court, peace begins the moment the envelope opens. When the courtroom fell silent after Judge Lauren Lake revealed the DNA test results, it wasn't just a verdict being delivered. It was 41 years of misunderstanding dissolving in a single sentence. The silence spoke of pain, but also of release. The DNA test, that seemingly simple act of collecting and comparing genetic material, became a bridge between a father and daughter who had been strangers under the same sun. This moment embodies a truth that many learn too late. Justice is not merely about right or wrong. It is about healing what has been broken by time, pride, and doubt. In the words often echoed in the Game Changing Attorney podcast, the justice system must balance the precision of law with the compassion of humanity. Judge Lauren Lake does precisely that. For decades, Mr. Jackson lived under the shadow of accusation, carrying an invisible sentence handed down not by a court, but by circumstance. He spoke of being unable to secure work, unable to travel, unable to live without the weight of child support debt he didn't believe he owed. His physical heart, weakened to the point of needing a pacemaker, became a metaphor for the emotional burden he carried. Every breath, every paycheck, every night spent in regret was a testimony that truth delayed is justice denied. And yet, in the eyes of Miss Jackson, the daughter who spent a lifetime seeking her father's acknowledgement, justice was never about punishment. It was about recognition. Her pain wasn't rooted in money or status, but in emotional exile. To be alive and unseen by the one person meant to love you unconditionally. This is a wound no court can measure. It's within this emotional paradox that Judge Lauren Lake operates, with empathy that never overshadows logic, and with firmness that never erases compassion. She understands what the relationship between law and justice truly means. Law determines facts. Justice restores faith. In one of her remarks that has since been quoted in legal circles and podcast discussions, Judge Lake once said that truth is not cruel, denial is. Her courtroom doesn't weaponize DNA, it redeems it. Each test result, each revelation, becomes an opportunity for families to begin again. The DNA test has become a recurring theme in modern legal storytelling, featured not only on television, but across digital platforms such as the Divorce Course podcast and the Game-Changing Attorney podcast. These discussions often explore how the advancement of forensic evidence has revolutionized not just the evidence stage in divorce cases, but the very philosophy of family law. Where once words and promises defined relationships, now science confirms or dismantles them. But what happens when science exposes what love could not? That's the haunting question that lingers after cases like this. People regret taking DNA tests not because they don't value truth, but because the truth, once known, demands change. It dismantles the illusions that once held their world together. Mr. Jackson's story mirrors the emotional aftermath heard in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, narratives, where individuals confront past mistakes, seek forgiveness, and strive for renewal. His public apology to his daughter, offered in front of the nation, wasn't just for her, it was for every parent who has ever loved through denial, every soul who has ever chosen silence over reconciliation. The power of such moments lies not in their drama, but in their humanity. Judge Lauren Lake transforms these moments into lessons for both law students and families watching at home. Through her measured tone, she teaches that justice, when stripped of empathy, becomes cruelty disguised as order. This theme echoes in academic discussions on the concept of justice in jurisprudence. How true justice requires more than legal correctness. It requires moral courage. Philosophers from Aristotle to Rawls debated whether justice should prioritize fairness or truth, but Judge Lake demonstrates that both coexist when law serves people rather than pride. In this case, truth arrived through evidence, but redemption arrived through forgiveness. When Miss Jackson said, "I forgive you," the courtroom became sacred space. Forgiveness is not written in the Evidence Act, nor codified in any statute, yet it remains the ultimate remedy the law can inspire. Her statement reflected something deeper, the moral victory of a daughter who chose compassion over resentment. And for Mr. Jackson, those words carried more weight than any legal decree. They were the final verdict his heart had waited decades to hear. This is what makes Judge Lauren Lake's court more than a television set. It's a mirror to real life, a living example of how the relationship between law and justice is not static, but fluid, breathing, and painfully human. Her cases often remind viewers that behind every legal term, adverse inference, burden of proof, paternity, there's a story of love, fear, and identity. In her handling of such emotionally charged cases, Judge Lake also illustrates how adverse inference in evidence applies not only to facts, but to life. When we refuse to face the truth, When we allow assumptions to stand in place of evidence, we create our own injustice. Mr. Jackson's refusal to take a DNA test earlier in life became his own adverse inference. His silence served as evidence of guilt, not uncertainty. That's the tragic irony of his story. Had he pursued the truth decades earlier, he might have saved himself and his daughter from years of estrangement. But fear, pride, and shame create their own prisons, and no gavel can unlock them until we choose to face the truth across podcasts and discussions, especially in the divorce course. Podcast. This case has been analyzed as a textbook example of how evidence can reshape relationships. The evidence stage in divorce cases, for instance, is where emotions often overwhelm logic. But Judge Lake's approach offers a roadmap for balance. Emotion can inform empathy, but it cannot replace evidence. Her methods have even been cited in discussions of Supreme Court rulings that examine the role of emotional testimony in family law. Legal analysts have praised her ability to maintain courtroom discipline without silencing genuine human pain. In her court, law and justice don't compete. They collaborate. That collaboration echoes in other types of cases too, like adoption stories, where DNA doesn't always determine belonging, and cheating stories, where it often dismantles illusion. Whether it's a child seeking their biological parents, or a spouse seeking closure after betrayal, every story returns to the same principle. Truth changes everything, and yet, truth alone isn't enough. It must be followed by choice. After the DNA results confirmed Mr. Jackson as the biological father, Judge Lauren Lake didn't simply close the case. She reminded him of the moral duty that comes after justice, the duty to rebuild. "You can begin again," she told him, echoing the spirit of celebrate recovery testimonies. That's not legal language. It's human language. In the larger framework of jurisprudence, this case becomes more than entertainment. It becomes study material. It explores how the concept of justice in jurisprudence can evolve with time and technology. DNA testing, once an innovation, is now a cornerstone of truth-seeking in modern law. But its implications reach far beyond the courtroom. It forces society to reconsider the meaning of family. It challenges faith, marriage, and the idea of unconditional love. It questions whether justice is about punishment or understanding. These are the same questions debated in classrooms, podcasts, and even Supreme Court deliberations around the world. For every full episode of Paternity Court that ends with applause or tears, there's a deeper moral question lingering beneath. How do we live with the truth once we find it? Mr. Jackson and his daughter answered that question with forgiveness, but not everyone can. Many who appear before Judge Lauren Lake carry unresolved anger, guilt, or disbelief. They are people torn between the comfort of illusion and the pain of reality. For them, the DNA test is not just scientific, it's spiritual. It forces them to confront who they are and who they've become in the absence of truth. What makes this particular case unforgettable isn't just its emotional depth, it's how perfectly it captures the ongoing struggle within family law, the war between fact and feeling. Judge Lauren Lake, in her distinct style, bridges that gap through empathy that never compromises justice. Her courtroom reflects a broader cultural moment where podcasts, documentaries, and even legal seminars are re-evaluating the relationship between law and justice. The voices on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast often highlight cases where lawyers had to become healers, where evidence wasn't enough without empathy. That's what makes stories like this resonate. Because beyond the DNA test, beyond the adverse inference, and beyond the Evidence Act, lies the one thing law can never fully define: human forgiveness. And perhaps that's where justice truly lives. In the end, Mr. Jackson and Miss Jackson stood together, not as accuser and accused, not as plaintiff and defendant, but as father and daughter. For the first time in 41 years, they saw each other clearly, without doubt, without denial. The truth didn't just prove something, it restored something. Their story, shared across podcasts, court transcripts, and full episodes, remains a symbol of what happens when courage meets compassion, and when law finally serves love. The lesson is timeless. DNA can prove who we are, but only forgiveness can define who we become. By the time the courtroom cleared, the weight of 4 decades hung in the air, thick, silent, unforgettable. Judge Lauren Lake had delivered not just a verdict, but a life-altering truth. The DNA test, the unrelenting voice of science, had spoken with finality. Mr. Jackson was indeed the father. But the power of that truth extended far beyond the paper that confirmed it. It reached deep into the moral fabric of what justice truly means. For Mr. Jackson, the truth was both liberation and punishment. Liberation from a lifetime of doubt, yet punishment for years wasted in denial. For Miss Jackson, the truth was both validation and sorrow. A confirmation that brought peace, but also a reminder of everything she'd lost while waiting to be believed. And for Judge Lauren Lake, it was another example of why the relationship between law and justice must remain rooted in empathy, because in the world of family law, the truth alone isn't enough. It must be delivered with compassion to heal rather than harm. When we examine this case through the lens of modern legal philosophy and the concept of justice in jurisprudence, it becomes clear that paternity disputes are never just legal matters. They are moral and emotional reckonings. The DNA test may close a case file, but it opens lifelong questions about forgiveness, loyalty, and the human condition. Across countless podcasts, from the Divorce Course podcast to the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, legal experts continue to revisit cases like this, not because of their sensational nature, but because they reveal the delicate interplay between evidence and ethics. One episode of the Game-Changing Attorney podcast summarized it perfectly. The law provides structure, justice provides humanity. When you separate one from the other, you get results without resolution. This is exactly what Judge Lauren Lake embodies. She reminds us that evidence, no matter how precise, cannot heal without understanding. Her courtroom is a living example of how adverse inference in evidence works not only in legal doctrine, but also in human behavior. When someone avoids truth for too long, that avoidance itself becomes its own kind of evidence, a reflection of fear, pride, and human fragility. Mr. Jackson's avoidance of a DNA test for decades demonstrated this principle in real life. The longer he ran from the truth, the heavier it became. And when he finally faced it, the evidence didn't just clear his name, it revealed his heart. The healing power of justice. The scene of reconciliation between father and daughter might be over for the cameras, but its echo lives on in countless celebrate recovery testimonies across communities. These are the stories of men and women who have faced their past with humility, who've realized that truth changes everything, even when it arrives late. Many such testimonies mirror the same structure of this courtroom story: pain, denial, confrontation, and eventual rebirth. The difference is that here, the stage of justice provided a platform for healing. This is why the Divorce Course podcast and similar shows emphasize that the courtroom is not only a space for rulings, but also for reflection. Judge Lauren Lake, through her tone and wisdom, creates an atmosphere where legal discourse turns into moral restoration. Her words, gentle yet firm, transform the courtroom into something closer to therapy. Her rulings become lessons in humanity, not just law. This is what separates her from traditional judges. In her courtroom, justice doesn't end with the verdict. It begins there. Her approach reflects a living jurisprudence, one that views law as a moral ecosystem rather than a rigid structure. When she told Mr. Jackson, "You can begin again," it wasn't just courtroom closure, it was spiritual counsel. It reminded millions watching that forgiveness is the law of the heart, a code beyond constitutions or statutes, DNA, evidence, and the soul of justice. The rise of DNA testing in modern law has reshaped the very foundation of justice. It has solved crimes, corrected wrongful convictions, and clarified family disputes that once lingered unresolved for generations. But with every advancement comes a human cost. As the Game-Changing Attorney podcast once noted, DNA doesn't just reveal truth, it reveals consequences. The people who regret taking DNA tests are often those who discover a truth they weren't prepared to handle. Children learning their parents aren't who they believed, or parents realizing love doesn't always align with biology. Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom serves as a microcosm of that human tension. The law demands truth, but truth demands courage. And when courage is absent, regret takes its place. The evidence stage in such cases isn't merely about data, it's about destiny. When the envelope is opened, it doesn't just declare percentages, it redefines lives. Families once united by assumption are now divided by proof. Yet, paradoxically, it's in that division that many find healing. This paradox defines the relationship between law and justice. Law functions in black and white. Justice lives in shades of forgiveness. The law asks, what happened? But justice asks, why did it happen? And how do we move forward? In the Supreme Court, legal scholars often debate this balance. Yet Judge Lake demonstrates it daily through compassion, through listening, and through her refusal to let truth become punishment. Adoption, betrayal, and redemption. This case also speaks to universal themes found in adoption stories and cheating stories, tales, where truth often threatens to destroy relationships before ultimately restoring them. Adoption stories reveal that love doesn't require biology. Cheating stories remind us that betrayal doesn't erase humanity. And somewhere in between those extremes lies the very essence of paternity court. The relentless search for truth amid broken trust. When viewed through the moral framework of Celebrate Recovery testimonies, this case becomes not a scandal but a sermon. It shows how confronting truth is the first step to recovery, whether in faith, family, or law. The concept of justice in jurisprudence evolves precisely through such cases, where law's rigidity must yield to moral elasticity. True justice is not satisfied by verdicts alone. It seeks restoration of dignity and peace. Judge Lauren Lake's work symbolizes that evolution. She doesn't merely quote the law, she humanizes it. Her questions dig deeper than evidence, reaching into the psychology of guilt and the anatomy of regret.